Like, the reason why men do this, I don't think it's because we're biologically wired differently. I think it's because we'll feel like some level of shame depending on what we're sharing.
It just feels like there is some sort of biological imperative there in the end that makes us so different. That
I disagree. I'm not calling you out or anybody, okay? If men are supposed to be like the hyper rational, hyper logical, hyper awesome, huge business guy, super competitive, all this, but like we're too retarded to figure out how to talk to each other, I just don't buy that. Don't ever use. I'm way off the norm there. Most people enjoy
that's my
sharing.
point, though.
No.
Is you think that, but
No,
you're describing
I know
most
that.
men.
No,
I think people like Fresh and Fit are taking things that are true and then they're taking it to like some sort of extreme. Whereas like, yeah, I think women are probably turned off by emotions from men more so than men are turned off by emotions from women. But yeah, they take it to an extreme where there's no possibility that you could ever talk about something emotional with a woman without her getting turned off. If you and I got on to Discord every day, we didn't really talk, but we played video games together. After about a month, you and I would call each other friends just because we have a shared activity with one another. And that's kind of how men create bonds with one another.
Yeah, I understand.
It's just having something shared with one another.
Yeah, you're doing the same thing.
Let me ask you, do you think men are more open today than they were like 15, 20 years ago?
Probably, I think so, yeah.
Okay, what kind of like marker would you look for? Like, what kind of like data set would you look for to say this is making the difference that I would hope for?
What's making the difference I would hope for? Oh God.
The social bounds are changing. We would also expect the things within neurolinguistics and communication science to change as well.
Maybe, but again, there have been like other huge changes in society as well, right?
If our style matches our processing style, then you would expect both to change in tandem.
Yeah, I guess maybe, yeah.
How those differences show early on in our lives, and then feeling like nobody is even acknowledging those parts whatsoever. And it seems like, yeah, we're just jumping the gun to like, oh, we don't communicate our emotions, therefore we're committing suicide at higher rates, and we're doing this at higher rates, and we're doing that at higher rates. And I just don't see them connected as much as other people seem to think they're connected.
Yeah, I think you brought up some good points. I actually really enjoyed that conversation.
You've said this before about men and emotions, and can you clarify for me? Like, it seems like, and how do I word it? It's like, what makes you think that the way that you think men should process emotions is the right way?
Because men are killing themselves at huge rates, because men seem like when they communicate to each other, it's borderline autism. And then when I see the differences between men and women engagement with the opposite sex on things like Tinder or Grindr, men seem to genuinely just have no fucking concept of like what other people are thinking about them or like how to communicate in an appropriate manner. And that kind of blows what I'm talking about, yeah.
But what if I told you that you're the minority that says that? Like, what makes you right with that? That's what I'm asking.
I guess at this point we're kind of roughly.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was a really good question. Because this is kind of my question as well. Like, why do you think you know what you're talking about here? Like, you're just saying men commit suicide at higher rates, therefore they should do X. And it's like, wait, where did you get X from? Where did that come from? It's like you just made that up. Like, you just came up with something random, and now you're just saying like, oh, men commit suicide at higher rates, therefore they should eat hot dogs more. What? Like, that's the equivalent of what it is he's saying here. Men commit suicide at higher rates, therefore they need to eat dirt. Like, how are you connecting men commit suicide at higher rates, therefore they need to communicate like women? It's like, the differences are insane when it comes to the way that we communicate with one another with gender differences and the ways that we value that communication, the ways that we value what it is that we're getting, the way that we intake the information. Like, all of these things are massively different between men and women. And that's what I'm talking about. Where did you get all your information from? Any studies that show the stuff that you say is true and not just your personal experience? I'm not talking about personal experience. Again, I worked in linguistic marketing for a long time. These are things that we have to study in order to come up with different ads to appeal to different types of people. Let's see. Notable differences in male-to-male friendships and female-to-female friendships. Male-to-male friendships are side-to-side, fostered and maintained through shared activity. Female-to-female friendships are face-to-face, fostered and maintained through intimacy, communication, and support. Male-to-male friendships are less intimate. than female friendships. Male-to-male friendships are less fragile than female friendships, e.g., men will consider someone a friend if they do not maintain or stay in constant contact. See, this is all stuff that I was kind of talking about earlier. So yeah, male-to-male friendships are less fragile than female friendships. This is what I was talking about earlier, is like men can literally get into physical fights with one another, and they both assume they are still friends after. Like, they just assume that. They're just still going to be friends. Whereas women, they can have the smallest disagreement, and it's just like a verbal fight with one another. They have to come back after and decide if they still want to be friends afterwards. This is like, it's like a huge hurdle for them to get over. Whereas men can have these massive like problems with one another, and it doesn't matter. They're not friends with each other over these massive problems. They're friends with one another over shared activity or shared interests. And so as long as those shared interests and shared activity still exist, this fight is not going to hinder anything, because that's not what they valued in the first place. So it's all good. Like, yeah, it's very different types of stuff. Emotional attachment, females have desire strong emotional attachment with the person they perceive to be a friend. Men are more likely to remain friends after an argument or a fight, whereas women are not. Yep, there we go. There's another one. Women require more frequent contact with somebody they consider to be a friend. Men are more likely, this is all stuff that we've been over today. This is great. Men are more likely to use humor to taunt friends while viewing this as innocent fun. Yeah, this is, so when we talk about like men fighting one another and things like that, this is why men can be like real dicks to one another, and they can make fun of each other. They can jab at each other. They can find like another guy's like biggest insecurity and just keep pointing it out and keep pointing it out and keep pointing it out and keep throwing it in his face time after time after time after time. And it's all in good fun. It's all good. This is awesome. If he's short, you know, he's a little short, we are going to roast him till the day he dies for being short, right? We will continue throwing this in his face. But if a woman is a little tall, she's like 6 foot, the girlfriends will never bring that up. If they bring it up at all, they will bring it up as a positive. Like, oh, I'm so happy that you can reach the stuff on the top shelf, or blah, blah, blah. I'm so glad you're around, blah, blah. They'll only bring it up as a positive, right? They're not going to bring up some sort of insecurity and just throw it in her face over and over and over. They would never do this. But this is like, the guys have to do this in order to, it's like a part of creating the bond is being able to dick on one another, like to be able to like throw shade at one another. That it's like, it's in movies all the time where they say like, if I make fun of you, that means I like you. That's a real thing for men. Like, studies show this is a real thing for men. Men really feel closer to somebody if they make fun of them. Women are more likely to refrain from taunting and humor out of fear it may hurt their friends' feelings. Men tend to hang out more in a group. The more the merrier, while women typically prefer to go out with one good friend. It's like we have very different ways of processing. And my point is that, yeah, I think that we are naturally processing these things differently, and that we are naturally going to engage in these ways very differently. So when he says that men should have relationships like women do, I don't know where he gets that from. I don't know where he gets that from. I think that that's ridiculous.
Too retarded to even have the notion that they're lacking something.
Okay, do you have, like, can you watch the language?
Sorry. Men are too emotionally stunted to even realize there's a problem, oftentimes seems to be the case.
But what makes you think that, like, that's true? Like, I'm really not trying to appeal to anybody, but it's always so interesting to me that, like, the majority.
See, this is what she's trying to get at here is my issue. Like, he's saying these things are true, therefore they're emotionally stunted. It's like, why do you put that value on there like that? Why do you value it in that way? Like I say all the time, men don't have as like close emotional relationships with their friends, and that women have like a more well-rounded way of prioritizing their life, and that women are much like closer with their friends and have like more intimate bonds with one another, stuff like that. But I don't say men have worse relationships with their friends, or women have better relationships with their friends. I don't say that. And that's what he says. He says one is better and the other should emulate the better one. And that's where I disagree. Just hello.
Hello. What's up?
What's up, man? Okay. So I watched some of your video with a girl. I guess she was like a red pill girl. I'm not really sure. But you guys were talking about men needing to like communicate more and do better like communicating their emotions, which the idea of that I agree with. It's the part that I feel like I have a disagreement with is where you're saying you're kind of comparing men to women and kind of saying that men should communicate more like women. And you didn't say that outright, so if you want to correct that, then that's my bad. But
sure, I can say that outright. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I do think that there's like more than enough data on like within linguistics or like neuro linguistics or like communication science that says men and women just communicate differently, and we even like process information differently, or when we talk we have like different goals of what we're trying to do when we have conversations, and I feel like we're just never going to communicate like women do.
I mean, I don't disagree that we have like different goals and all that. Like, I would agree with that, but the question is why? Like, do we think this is like part of like the biology of man and it's completely totally unchangeable, or is this just kind of what socially we do?
I wouldn't say completely and totally unchangeable, but I would say like, yeah, we could probably make it to where men could be more open with their emotions and things like that. But I think that there's still going to be a big gap there in how we communicate and what it is that we're trying to do when we communicate. And I don't think that men will ever just be as open as women are with their emotions, or that they're even like, I don't know that they're capable of doing that.
Yeah, that's possible, but why would I it's possible that is the case, but I don't think men and women have to be the same. Men just need to get better at communicating, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. I don't know if they would ever be the exact same, but I don't think I need them to be the same. No.
Well, no, I don't think they need to be the same either. That's why I started off by saying I'm perfectly happy saying that men need to do better with communicating their emotions, and that we should probably do some things to make them feel more open with their emotions. But I don't know that, like, I think comparing them to women is different because women just have like a completely different style of communication. I think they have a very like different goal, what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, I'm not going to agree with any of this. So they have different goals, they have different, all that, of course. But that's like when an investigator is asking questions, he has a different goal than when a child is asking questions. But like when you say they have a different goal, you're implying that it's like something intrinsic or fundamental to like the male biology versus the female biology. I don't believe that's the case. When it comes to communication styles, there's no shot. I don't think that's at all.
Okay, so when I say men and women have different goals, okay, so I'm saying men seem to talk on like a specific topic and move in almost like a linear fashion where
but you're implying, do you think that's like a biological construct, that's like a thing that is just like built into our brains? Or do you think that's just like a learned pattern of communication over time?
I think the differences are so big that I would have to say that there probably is some big biological factor within that. Again, I think that we can probably socially engineer men to like change some things, or like within a range, or on a spectrum, we can get them to move one direction or the other, but not, again, yeah, just not like as far as when I talk about different goals. That's why I'm saying, yeah, I think that there is a biological reasoning behind why we communicate differently, and even just within like the first like 6 months of birth, like we can see that like the ways that boys and girls learn how to I guess I should go ahead and say, when I say men and women, I mean males and females, biological males and females. Okay, so yeah, so like even within the first 6 months, we can see that like boys learn to talk slower, that the like things that they learn to communicate is going to be different, and it seems like when men communicate, they're communicating for like what is it, like, I guess my overall argument is going to be that men's brains seem to focus on completely different things that will make it to where.
Yeah, and again, I'm not disagreeing on any of this. I just don't think that this is like a fucking like hardwired biological thing. We have very different social trainings for men and women when it comes to communication. I don't think that this is like, I don't buy it that like our brains we can learn and do incredible things. I doubt your communication style is locked in based on your gender. That seems implausible to me. It's possible, I guess. Like, I guess like if there was research that existed, it could persuade me, but that just seems like a hard sell for me.
Yeah, my argument isn't that it's locked in. It's that they're that they are fundamentally different from the beginning. That we can get them to come closer together, and we can get them to like move and become more like one another. But that they couldn't. I don't think they could possibly be the same.
Yeah, again, I've never said they need to be the same, but I think that like men can dramatically improve where they're at right now.
Well, so why don't you think that they could be the same?
Well, because I imagine there's going to be some. I mean, testosterone and estrogen are real. They're probably going to influence the way that we develop to some extent. I imagine that has to be the case, right?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we have the same idea on this. I'm trying to figure out where, because when you're saying men should communicate like women or more like women.
I don't like the idea that it's like women. I don't like the idea that men have to be like emotionally retarded and that like women are like the default like better communicators. I just think like being able to like share feelings or emotions with people. Like the reason why men do this, I don't think it's because we're biologically wired differently. I think it's because we'll feel like some level of shame depending on what we're sharing. I don't think it's a biological wiring thing. I think it's like a socially engineered phenomenon.
Yeah, it's not okay. Yeah, I guess it's not that they're. Let me think about this for a second. It's that when you talk about it, you are putting values on the way that men communicate and the way that women communicate. And
yeah,
you say,
of course, I think women communicate better. Yes.
Right. And then you compare men to women in the way that you say, like, yes, they like women communicate in this way. Men should do this. Or women communicate, in this way. Men should do this. And yeah, I guess my point is that I think that we can, socialize to make men feel more comfortable doing these things, but I don't think men naturally just talk about their emotions or talk about their feelings. And even when I don't think
either. That's a hard. So what do we naturally do? Communication is going to be something that's like we're socially and culturally wired from birth, right? If I walk up to like a fucking dude on the street and I try to kiss him on the cheek, he's gonna fucking kill me. But in some countries, that's like a normal mode of communication, or that's like a normal greeting. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, so like I don't know, I don't even know how to begin to process like what does communication look like naturally when communication necessarily is a social thing that happens between two people. Yeah, I don't think that the gulf right now that exists between male communication versus female communication is like a biological brain thing. I don't know if I believe that, I guess.
Well, but you are saying that there is some difference in that they you don't think that they're necessarily going to be the same exact way in the end.
Probably not going to be 100% the same, sure.
And so, yeah, so it does seem as though you think there are some like gaps in the ways that we communicate, like biologically, like there are some
but like if I would say
differences.
the gap would exist naturally like at 10%, and right now it's at like 80%. So there's like way more in common that we could move towards than being like, I'm a male. It just, none of this makes sense to me. If men are supposed to be like the hyper rational, hyper logical, hyper awesome, huge business guy, super competitive, all this, but like we're too retarded to figure out how to talk to each other, I just don't buy that. Like men, no offense to anybody, but men have been the builders of the world, right? We have like done math, we've done science, we've put people on the moon, we've done all these things, but a man is too retarded to figure out how to share a feeling. I don't buy that. I can't believe that our brains, I can't believe that in some areas we're so unbelievably intelligent and clever and gifted and athletic and amazing, and then in other areas we have the emotional stuntedness of like a 12-year-old woman. I just can't believe that. I can't believe that's the case. I can't believe that's a biological gap. I think that's a socially trained thing.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we're too retarded to share a feeling. I'm saying that it's less likely to be like cathartic for us, or that it's less likely to make a big difference. Like even when you talk about your feelings, you kind of explain it in a way that we would think of like what it is that we're talking about when it comes to men. You say like, yeah, like I'd just rather be alone, or I don't express it.
No, hold on. Don't ever use, I'm way off the norm there. Most people enjoy
That's my
sharing.
point though, is you think that, but you're describing most men.
No, I know that because when I go out and I talk to a woman, woman, I don't spend the next 3 hours happy that I finally have a mother to share all of my feelings with. Like I hear every single woman complain about when they go on Tinder dates with these men that are emotionally stunted. I have no problem communicating my feelings to other women. I have no problem having emotional conversations with them. I just tend to prefer not to. I keep listening to myself because I prefer to. But you can't say, oh, I'm like that too. I'm a guy and I'm just like Destiny there, when you have these 50 million different horrible negative outcomes related to that type of emotional processing. Most people enjoy talking to people and sharing feelings and getting feedback on their things. I just don't, but I'm an outlier there. I know, and I recognize I'm an outlier. If other people want to say like, oh, well, I'm an outlier too, that's fine. But there can't be all of these downstream negative impacts from your emotional processing if that's the case. Like,
well, that's the thing is that I don't. So what exactly are the negative outcomes that you're talking about then?
One is an inability to solicit feedback from friends on important life things. Like sometimes men won't talk about like, is it right if I marry this person? Is it right if I, like make this big decision? Like my parents are dying. I don't know what to do. Like guys just have really difficult times talking to each other about these types of important things. Sometimes they will, but women will get feedback from all their friends about these types of things. They'll have huge group discussions about it, and men will say nothing. Right? A guy will go through an abusive relationship for a woman for 5 years and not say a single fucking thing to any of his guys. Any of his friends, right? Whereas women will complain about all of their fucking, probably overshare about problems that they have with their significant others. Just the sharing of feelings in general are things that guys aren't even encouraged to have feelings. They're encouraged to repress them. And then all these guys wander through life thinking that they're just like this stoic fucking god demon, when in reality they're just like emotionally stunted schizoids. And that comes out anytime you try to get any sort of actual emotional engagement from them. That's how you get these people that are fresh and fitter saying that like if you show any vulnerability to your woman, she's gonna fucking leave you. Or that's how you get people like Chris Kyle thinking that like, well, in order to process my PTSD, I'm just gonna go to the range and shoot with a friend, and he ends up like killing his friend and committing suicide. Like,
yeah,
I know that's in my opinion, but
I think people like Fresh and Fit are taking things that are true and then they're taking it to like some sort of extreme. Whereas like, yeah, I think women are probably turned off by emotions from men more so than men are turned off by emotions from women. But yeah, they take it to an extreme where there's no possibility that you could ever talk about something emotional with a woman without her getting turned off. But when you say that like men have an inability,
sorry, wait, hold on one second. Sorry. Okay, go.
Okay. So when you say men have an inability to solicit feedback and they have a difficult time talking about news or like new things in their life, I think that this is a product of the way that men choose their friends. Like what it is that men bond over is very different from what women bond over. Like women choose friends based on like, just allow me to lay this out for a second, because this is kind of where a lot of this comes from my perspective is women, when they choose friends, they're choosing friends based on like some intimate shared connection that they have with one another. When like the more information a woman gets from another woman, it's like the more they're unlocking within that friendship and the closer they're becoming, that the stronger that bond becomes. Whereas like you and me, if you and I got on to Discord every day, we didn't really talk, but we played video games together. After about a month, you and I would call each other friends just because we have a shared activity with one another. And that's kind of how men create bonds with one another.
I understand.
It's just having something shared with one another.
Yeah, you're doing the same thing. Men don't have emotional conversations, but you're making this link and saying like, therefore men aren't supposed to, or men can't, and men don't want to. I don't agree with that. I agree with what you're saying, that like you can hang out with a guy and a guy will call a guy a friend, or like, oh yeah, this is my really good friend. We haven't spoken in 5 years, but we're still cool or whatever. Like I agree with you that that's what's happening, but I wouldn't take the jump and say biologically that's just how we're built. Like I think that we socialize in a particular way.
Okay, so you think the way that we choose friends is socialized like more so than it would be?
Sure.
Because, yeah, again, I'm not saying that we can't make it to where men are more open. Like, I think that that's a good thing. I think we should encourage it. And I think that, like, we should change society in ways to make it to where men feel more, like, capable or more available to share their feelings. But, I wonder if sometimes we push it too much on men to where almost there's this like disconnect where they feel like there's just something wrong with them, where people have this expectation of them that they just don't understand. Like even when like I would say, yeah, I would rather deal with my stuff alone. I would rather kind of be separated from everybody. If I have a girlfriend and I'm going through something rough, she wants to come and console me and hold me, and I kind of just want to be like, hey, just like sit there, just like be around me, don't like touch me or anything, but like sit there and just, you know, I'll enjoy your company, but I need to like process this myself. I need to think through this myself. I need to, you know, come to some sort of like logical conclusion that gives me a prescription in the end that says this is how I can fix things. Like, whereas I even think that when women go through these sorts of things, they're not looking for a prescription. They're not looking for a solution. They're looking like to come to grips with something. They're looking to like, yeah, feel okay with what it is that happened. And I just think that we deal with these things so differently in so many different areas that it's hard to say that it's, I would say that, yeah, there's like it just feels like there is some sort of biological imperative there in the end that makes us so different. That
I disagree. I'm not calling you out or anybody, okay? So, but I just have these conversations. Here's the reality. When I hear people talk about these biological differences that are so deeply ingrained, and I hear people talk about like how men are stoic and men are leaders and men processing, here's the reality: is that most men are weak. Most people are weak. By design, that's how it works. We're social creatures, okay? If all men were walking around as these shredded giga-chads with emotional stoicism, and they had all their shit handled together, and they figured all their stuff out, and they didn't have all these problems all the time, then fine. Then maybe that way of male processing works. But all these fantastical desires that every man is this like built-in leader that handles his shit, it's just not true. Most guys are weak as fuck. They can't handle all these things, and that's by design. Human beings can't do these things. A male's ability to deal with and handle like extreme emotional turbulence is about the same as a woman's ability to do it. People think that the women have less of an ability to do it because they complain about it more, but that's a sign of weakness from the men because they don't even know how to fucking complain about it more. So they deal with it in silence, and then when they turn 45, they fucking kill themselves. Or they do horrible jobs and they work themselves until they're half fucking dead because they're too retarded to say, hey, I need a break or I want to do something different. And then they die with broken down fucking bodies when they're 55. Right? Like, that's why fucking women have like a 10-year longer lifespan. It's why men kill themselves at 3 times the fucking rate. And it's why probably the 37% of women are happy being single because they've got good friendships, whereas 24% of men are happy being single because they don't have a single fucking person in the entire world besides their moms that they can share an emotion with. I do not think the archetype of man works for the standard man. I think the problem is the role models and the men that get chosen, that they're held up on a pedestal, these are exceptional men that have exceptional ways of processing things. But not every person can be like that. And the male role model, the male archetypical like role model is so far removed from the average human experience that when men aspire to that, all they do is drive themselves deeper into misery. And on the contrary, rather than hearing somebody like me say, hey, maybe you should look at how fucking women talk to each other, try to copy some of that shit because it seems like they're doing something that's working for them. People are like, no, that makes me feel bad. Instead, I'm just going to try to be like the archetypical man, and I'm going to be a loser and a failure and weak in the mind and can't process anything, but I'm going to keep trying to strive towards this thing that is ultimately incompatible with how my mind works. That's what I feel like it is. But like, if there was some period in time, or if there's some way that like men can process and do all this shit like perfectly, then maybe I'd be more inclined to agree. But it doesn't seem to be the case right now. I feel like men's communication styles is objectively worse than women. I don't think it's subject. I think it's just full on fucking terrible. And I think it can be unlearned. I think it can be broken. I think you can find better ways to communicate with people and have healthier, more fruitful relationships. Sorry, that's my feeling on it. But okay, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, I would say men's style is different, not worse necessarily. Now, I would say, like, when you're talking about men are leaders, they're giga chad, you know, this, that, and the other, that's not my argument. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not one of these fresh and fit, like, red pill guys. But I do work in, like, linguistic areas, and, like, I've studied a lot of, like, different types of communication styles, and there's, and so these are the conclusions that I've come to over time. Let me ask you, do you think men are more open today than they were, like, 15, 20 years ago?
Probably, I think so, yeah.
Okay, what kind of like marker would you look for? Like, what kind of like data set would you look for to say this is making the difference that I would hope for?
What's making the difference I would hope for? Oh God, we would have to probably look at like self-reported happiness levels. We might look at length of relationships. We might look at how early people are starting families. There's a ton. We would have to proxy it because, I mean, self-reported happiness is something we can look at, but that's like a hard. We need other indicators. But every other variable that's going to be impacted by this is going to have like 50 million other things impacted too. But those are probably the data sets I would kind of try to look at. I would try to look for. But I imagine it'd be difficult to measure these things exactly. But
yeah, of course. Okay, yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what I would look for as well. Probably not length of relationships, but I think, yeah, like reported happiness, stuff like that. It sounded like the other day when you were talking about this, you were using like men's suicide rates as a reason for like,
sure, one proxy, yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It just seems like the men's suicide rates, the more that we like become open with our emotions, the more suicide rates happen to go up. I'm not saying that those are correlation, or like that the correlation equals causation. I'm saying I don't know that those are even connected at all, because yeah, it just seems to be going in the opposite direction of our of our like social norms, making it to where we can be more open today.
Hold on. I'm trying to see, has suicide like increased for younger people, or
I'm not even talking about just for younger people. I'm talking about just for men in general. It's
well,
normally going to be
younger
men
people
around like 35 to 45.
Yeah, younger people is important because if men in general commit quite a bit of suicide, but as the population ages, if suicide is something that's happening at older ages, then you would expect to see suicide rates climb. But it's not because people are becoming more suicidal. It's because the demographics of the population are shifting, right? If people tend to commit suicide in an older age and your population goes from 40% old people to 60% old people, you'd expect to see the suicide rates adjust accordingly, right?
So you're saying that the social changes are what's causing the older people to commit suicide, right?
No, what I'm saying is that older people are more likely to commit suicide than younger people. So if the population is aging, a higher proportion of people is older, then you would expect to see, even if everything else in the society was exactly the same, the suicide rates would increase because you have more older people that are more likely to commit suicide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So then we wouldn't use suicide at all for this sort of issue.
Maybe. I don't know if you could use one indicator for this. I would say like these are some things I would look at. But I think in the past 20 years, your biggest change in society has been the internet. The internet has radically changed. And I know people want to hand wave it and look at like relationships and communicating styles and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that the internet has changed literally every single facet of our lives. Our refrigerators are connected to the internet now. Like it has changed every single thing possible. And in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to social media, it's made us change for the worse. So yeah, of course. But yeah, I don't know. Looking for indicators on like happiness and everything would be really, really, really difficult. But I mean, I'm sure there are people that try to measure it, you know?
Well, so more so like I would probably look at the types of things that I was talking about before, where it's like communication styles within like neurolinguistics or communication science. Like I would look at and see if the way that men are communicating is different, because it seems like the way that men process information is what, or the way that we communicate matches the way that we process information. And it seems like the way that we process information is seen very early within our lives, to where like we can kind of say that like this is how we naturally process it. But we could, again, I do think we can make it to where we're more available, emotionally available to the people around us. It's just that I don't think it's as big of a gap as other people might think.
Okay, maybe. I mean, I disagree. I don't think that neurolinguistics is going to tell you that like this is how we are like hardwired to communicate. It's just going to show you trends in communication, but it's not going to say for sure like one over the other.
Right, but we would expect a change if socially we are making, because like now we hear more and more like it's okay for men to cry, or more men should be more open with their emotions. And so if we are seeing that like the social bounds are changing, we would also expect the things within neurolinguistics and communication science to change as well.
Maybe, but again, there have been like other huge changes in society as well, right?
You're talking about like social media?
Yeah, like social media has been a massive negative driver, I think, for everybody's mental health, especially younger people. So I don't know if something like that would like override like the benefits of anything else that's happening literally anywhere, you know? But like, so here's something on the data level. There's that. I would also need mechanistically, what else is like I'm trying to think mechanically. Let's say you get a person and like a guy is now able to like communicate their feelings better or whatever. What part of that would cause somebody to be more suicidal?
Well, that's why I'm saying I don't know that suicide would actually be like an indicator. I would look at
what part of it makes somebody have worse like mental health outcomes even. Let's just say that basic. Let's say you teach a guy, now he's able to have like more like fulfilling conversations with his friends, or he can share emotional conversations with his friends more. Like what is the mechanic by which this person is becoming like less happy now?
I'm not. Hold on. Are you asking if do you think that I think that being more open is making them become less happy?
Yeah, that's what it sounded like the argument you were making was. Did I misunderstand?
No, I was saying it would seem like your argument would go the opposite direction of where the data is going. Whereas I'm saying it wouldn't make us more happy or more sad, that we're just going to continue communicating in a similar way either way.
Oh, I thought you said more men are like crying and shit today, or just being told to cry, I guess.
Yeah, I'm saying that we make socially, we say it is okay to cry and it's okay to be open with your emotions. And we can see within society that there are differences in the way that we are socializing men now. And we are making it to where they are more capable of being open with their emotions. And so if that's the case, we would hope that there would be some sort of difference within whatever data sets that we're looking for, whether it's happiness, whether it's suicide rates, whether it's whatever. We would think that there would be differences in those. And what I would look for is I would look at the data sets within, the linguistics and communication science, and I would want to see if the way that we're processing the information has actually changed, because if our style matches our processing style, then you would expect both to change in tandem.
Yeah, I guess maybe, yeah.
Because even with like the way that men are socialized early on, I think women are taught to like a bunch of things that we're not taught, right? Like boys already have difficulty talking early on. Women learn how to talk and how to like communicate much faster, or girls do early on. And then they're even taught things like how to be sexy, how to like smile more, how to make other people around them happy. And these are things that like boys aren't really taught as much. They're taught more how to like, shake somebody's hand hard, or like, weird things like that. And so I do think that there are a lot of like social factors that we, that make a big difference in the way that men have trouble socializing later on, and the way that they have trouble within relationships later on. So there's a lot of improvements that we can make there for sure. It's just that I think that the way that men process information is different, and that it seems as though when men are like complaining about an issue, or that they are talking about their feelings, they're looking for a solution. And when women are talking about their feelings, it is just cathartic just to talk about it, and just to like put that thing out into the ether and say, this is true, and have other people, accept that and accept you afterwards, and like all of that. It's just a very different way of processing for both. And so I would expect the ways that we process
I understand this, but I've heard this a lot. I just don't think I believe it. Like, men like to people will present like gossip as like a female thing, but like I don't know, when I worked in environments with like lots of men, like gossiping among guys is like really funny and shit too. Like it'll be about like who's fucking who, or it'll be about like I don't know, like talking shit on like the fucking boss or management or whatever. But like even my carpet cleaning job, where these guys are like blue collar workers, like a lot of between job talk is just shit talking, like how much we fucking hate management, or shit talking like a guy that's running like personal jobs out of his truck that we all hate, or like everybody does this. Everybody. I think everybody enjoys just like venting and gossiping. I don't think that's like a female thing, and like guys are always like talking, looking for solutions and shit. I just think
that's not what I'm saying either. I'm saying that the style in which we communicate is different. So it's not that we don't gossip. It's that when we gossip, we're not like. I think gossip is a good example, actually, because it's more so just in general, when we collect data sets from the ways that men communicate, that men are more likely to be looking for prescriptions or for solutions when they talk about emotions. So I would have to look into that, because I think that is a good example. But yeah, overall, it seems like when men communicate, emotions, that they're looking for solutions, and women want to be like validated and accepted. They want to like come to grips with whatever that thing is and feel, and feel like safe afterwards.
Huh. Okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess that's all I got then. Because, we're not too far off from one another. Again, I think that we can improve the way that men are socialized, and the way that like they're communicating their emotions. And I think that like men need to get better at this. But I also know that when you talk about the way that you process your emotions, I do feel connected to that. But then you also talk about how most men who think they're connected to that, or think that they communicate or process things the same way as you, you feel like they're just lying, and that like actually they just have a bunch of like
like I don't blame. I talk to a lot of people that don't believe my way of processing things. They think that I'm coping massively, and I don't even blame them, because anybody that tells me anything similar to me, I assume also that they're coping, because most men are. I've met a lot of men that claim to have similar communication styles to me and similar emotional processing styles to me, and almost all of them are cringy XD anime ultra edgy fucking loser lords that end up becoming like obsessive and stalkerish and weird about a girl, or super overly emotional in their feelings about like some other dramatic event. It happens time and time again. I think a lot of these men fancy themselves as being like the stoic anime edgy characters, and they're not. They have horrible breakdowns. They suck when it comes to like talking to people. Like they just have like all of the standard issues that I would expect to see from people that claim to have that sort of communication style. But who knows? Maybe I'm
Yeah, I don't watch anime, so
Sure.
I don't know. But yeah, it's just like that's my experience, and it seems like when I talk about this as well, everybody in my audience and everybody in my community, they all say the same things as well. It's like, oh yeah, that's how I process things as well. That's how I feel comfortable with things. I don't seem to have issues afterwards either. And so it seems like a lot of times when I go look at the data that says like why we have issues, or why we believe that our issues later on are connected to us not communicating our emotions. Every time, man, it starts off with some bullcrap on like gender is a social construct and therefore blah blah blah. And I just discount everything they say after that because I feel like they're not taking into consideration any of the biological factors that would change our brains and change the ways that we communicate and all of these other things. So it just, yeah, more and more I get frustrated when I look at these things because I don't see how they're connecting them.
I understand, and I think that's cringy when people do it, but I understand why. And that's because when I get people that will argue on the other end about how fundamentally different men and women are, we're not. We are incredibly similar. And across talking to tons of people, men and women are so much more alike than they are separate from each other. And it's cringe when somebody says no biological differences. There are biological differences. There are differences for sure. But I think people on the left tend to undercount those, and people on the left undercount the differences, but people on the right dramatically overshoot. Like, I think on Fresh and Fit, when I talk to these guys, like, I ask a question, this is an easy one. Are men and women more similar than different? The answer is absolutely yes, of course. We share like 98% of like everything we do. Men start out as women in the womb, right? Like we have a ton of shared biology and process between us. And like, yeah, there are definitely going to be differences. Like even in a in a perfect world where everybody's socialized the exact same, men and women will still probably communicate a bit differently. They'll still probably gravitate towards different jobs. Men will still be stronger than women, et cetera, et cetera. But like the idea that we're like these fundamentally different creatures that have these totally different like interior biological like neuro experiences, I think that's wild. But
yeah, of course we are more similar than we are different. And when like it's like when we're looking at like the entire animal kingdom and we look at like lions and tigers and we're like, oh man, they're so similar. Like they they're both felines, they're big cats, blah blah blah. But actually, like over time, we like if we're just looking at just tigers and just lions, now we see, oh man, there's so many differences. Like the way that they eat, the way that they live in packs or not live in packs, the way that they kill their prey. Like there's massive differences when you're looking at just the two. And I'm looking at just the two, men and women, and the ways that they communicate, and looking at specifically the ways that they communicate and seeing the differences and seeing the ways that those differences seem to be, or seeing how those differences show early on in our lives, and then feeling like nobody is even acknowledging those parts whatsoever. And it seems like, yeah, we're just jumping the gun to like, oh, we don't communicate our emotions, therefore we're committing suicide at higher rates, and we're doing this at higher rates, and we're doing that at higher rates. And I just don't see them connected as much as other people seem to think they're connected.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's really hard to quantify. I just know that, like, if I have a conversation that I want to talk about, like some like kind of like deep introspective feeling type of thing, I almost always prefer to talk to a woman over a man, because men just suck at having those types of conversations. If I want to talk about like some super like intellectual topic, or maybe like some political thing, or something that requires like a high level of expertise, I guess I'd probably favor a man because they tend to be more interested in those areas. But in terms of like any conversation like requiring any type of like emotional IQ, like for most men I just can't. It's a waste of fucking time. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that doesn't bleed over into other bad outcomes or not, but who knows?
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's a book that I read recently by Lou-Anne Brizendine. It's I think it's called The Female Biology or something, but it like talks specifically about how like estrogen will change our brains and how that changes the way that like different that we release different like receptors, or different receptors release different types of hormones, and then the way that changes our like emotional patterns and all of this other stuff. And there just seems to be like a big difference between the way males and females do these things. But again, that doesn't mean that I say that like men shouldn't communicate their emotions at all, or that we should be like, these stoic figures that never talk about their feelings. It's just that I feel like if all else was equal, I still think that men would communicate their emotions much less than women, but they would do it more than they do today, and that would probably be better.
Okay.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, man. For anybody, I'm Tomfoolery Show on YouTube.
Yeah, I love you, buddy. Be careful, okay?
All right, later, man.
Bye.
Okay. I'm not gonna lie, I had to force that a bit. There wasn't there wasn't much disagreement early on, so I kind of forced it a bit. I was trying to force a disagreement there. God, I wish I could have an emotional conversation with a male friend in a totally not homosexual way right now, where we both open about our feelings and cry a lot. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. It was a little frustrating because, yeah, I feel like he does this often where he treats me like I'm on like the far end of the spectrum, like we're on opposite ends. Well, he treats me like I'm this like red pill, you know, crazy right winger, when I know he knows that that's not who I am. But I feel like he does this all the time in arguments, and this was my issue in the way that he talked to Connor as well. Is he kept acting like Connor was like much farther right and much crazier than he actually was, and yeah, that was frustrating. Yeah, if you want to jump in, VC, you should have said women talk too much and called him soy, then fuck the show. that would have been so much better. You're so right, Freddie. Damn it, I wish I had thought of that. That would have been great. And like, you know what? I think the problem is that you're a bitch and you want to communicate like a bitch. Yo.
My man, how are you?
Doing well. How's it going?
It's going well. I joined because I thought we were going to talk about our feelings in a non-homo masculine way.
I don't think that's possible, obviously. If you heard my conversation, I don't think men can talk about their emotions without being soy cuckboys.
I think there's a lot of stigma associated with that. So I think you brought up some good points. I actually really enjoyed that conversation. So women and men are trained is probably the wrong word. They are raised to socialize differently. Mm-hmm. And men tend to be just in the way they're socialized, perhaps, but maybe this is more biology, prone to some violent socialization. Like two guys will fight for fun. You'll never see a bitch do that. Like women just usually they just don't.
There's this data set. Okay, so men actually are more likely to have fought their best friend, like fist fight with their best friends. And that like after they get into like a real physical, like pissed off fight, they will walk away and they both assume they're still friends. Whereas women, if they have a small verbal disagreement, like a verbal fight, they will have to come back to one another and decide that they still want to be friends afterwards. Like the way that we form bonds with one another is just so different that I have trouble believing that there's not like more biological patterns in there.
It probably is biological, but it might suggest something about the way we socialize men, that this is the case, that men will get physically violent with each other and then just be like, we cool? Yeah, we cool. Like, and this is a common occurrence with men, that it must escalate to violence. Like at some point you're going to fight your friend. You have, right? Have you ever fought your best friend?
Oh, yeah. My best friend, yes. I've gotten in many physical fights with him.
And maybe this is a remarkable difference in the way women are socialized compared to men, because that we rise to the level of violence makes us more dangerous, societally speaking.
Sure,
right?
but you have to take into consideration that like we are like dangerous, like violent animals first, and then it's more so that that hasn't been socialized out of us, where it has been socialized out of females.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, which might suggest that we probably ought to socialize men differently. Like maybe we shouldn't celebrate the fact that something like 40 or 50%, I don't remember what number it was, of men like have fought their best friend, like gotten into some violent altercation, was just like, we're friends still though.
Yep.
Because it might suggest something about like what men can also get away with if they're violent with the opposite sex, because they might understand it the same way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and that's kind of, but yeah, what I'm focusing on when I look at that sort of stuff is more so the way that we create bonds with one another and what it is we want, out of those bonds. Because if we're creating bonds over shared experiences and we don't even have to talk to one another to feel that bond, we're looking for very different things. And then the emotional part may not even like may not even apply to how we feel about the bond overall. It could be that we should we should communicate these things more anyways. But if I go and talk to one of my friends about my feelings, I don't know that I'm going to feel closer to him. Yeah. I don't know that I'll feel closer to him. Whereas a woman, she will feel closer to the person afterwards.
Well, so I would suggest that the trick to fixing that very problem, because I think that's a problem. I don't know if you think that's a problem. I think it's a problem that men can't talk to other men. Because it is awkward. I've talked to other men about their feelings. It can be awkward. It can be weird. The way to do that is to just normalize doing it, to just do it more openly, to just talk to other people about your feelings. And because I think a lot of men suffer from some very universal experiences. So I'll give you like an example of something I read. Something like 40% of men experience loneliness related depression, loneliness induced depression. That is something that is dangerous. That is a mental health problem that is universally, well, not universally male related, but like obviously is impacting men quite a lot. We should be able to talk about that publicly, just as a matter of like a public health concern. And you know what? Like I think I've been lonely before, and it fucking hurts. And not having somebody to talk to, that really like made a big difference in like how depressed you can be. You feel truly lonely when you have nobody you can communicate with.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of the good things about the internet is that like when people do feel lonely, they can like find other people to communicate with in some manner. But then
I don't know if I agree with in some manner.
Yes, in some manner. But once you use the internet as a cudgel, it seems to only create more problems. So
there's a few fair problems associated with this. The internet deals in sarcasm, weaponized sarcasm, bigotry, hate, right? That's all over the internet. There's a very potent self-preservation instinct for not sharing yourself on the internet, which is ironic because people share too fucking much anyway. This is actually probably more of a female-oriented thing. Like, I don't know that it sounds really weird. I don't think men talk about their feelings even like sarcastically necessarily. Like it's always going to be masked behind something. Whereas I think women are probably more likely to just come straight out and say, man, I'm feeling really like shit today or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes. But again, I think that like if we look at the way that men and women process differently, I'd expect that the way that they're going to communicate is going to be different as well. And that's kind of what, like, the part that I felt like he wasn't accepting is that I do want men to communicate their emotions more, but I don't think the way that they communicate and what they get out of that communication will ever be the same as women. And that like us putting that like goal on there is probably almost detrimental because it probably just like confuses people more so than anything.
Well, so is the trick to socialize men differently or to
not to socialize them differently, but not to compare them to women to say like you should communicate like women, because I don't think that will ever happen.
So then you would favor just like a male oriented way of communicating that isn't like, I don't know, what does communicate like women mean? Like if I'm telling you tomfoolery, I'm feeling real lonely. Like I feel lonely and depressed. Like how do I communicate like a woman?
I'm saying the stigma on men communicating their emotions is what we need to get rid of. And as long as we get rid of that stigma, men will feel more comfortable communicating their emotions if they want to.
I wouldn't gender it though. Like, cause I think like, I don't know that. I think the way women communicate their emotions generally is a lot healthier than the way men do. So I wouldn't say like you're expecting it to be like you do kind of got to become more womanly in the way you communicate and express yourself.
But you are gendering it in that case, and I'm saying don't gender it. I'm saying let's just say just communicate your emotions more, just make that more socially acceptable, and not gender it and say communicate more like women.
How do women communicate their feelings? I guess I don't understand what you mean.
So earlier I was talking about the way that women create bonds. So the more, it's almost like I say, like, you and I are both women. We're sitting across from each other at a dinner table, okay? We tell each other our names. We have this, like, line of floss from my chest to your chest now. And the more we talk about each other, the thicker that rope gets and the thicker that bond becomes between us. We have this stronger connection now, right?
So it's like a communication bondage, yeah?
Right. Whereas men, if they're communicating personal things about one another, that doesn't necessarily create a bond. It doesn't make that bond stronger for them. It doesn't make that bond better or anything. It's mostly time spent with one another, doing shared activities, doing things that they enjoy, have like playing in the same fantasy football league, playing basketball together, going to the gym together, playing video games together,
bonding
like,
over mutual activities.
Yes, and it's the time spent doing that creates the bond more than anything. It's like the sentimental value. So like a common thing that we look at is like men, after they come back from war, they'll talk about the bond with the other men just because they spent that time together. You know, we were in the trenches together. Like that means something to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything to a woman if she didn't have some personal emotional connection with the other people.
I would wager that men who do bond over activities make a very personal and emotional connection with another human being in that too. Like something else is clicking, chemically speaking, that it's not just your mutual enjoyment of the activities, right? Because you've got people you like to do certain activities with, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't take my best friend in real life to play, I don't know what the fuck I'd play with them. I don't know, a political convention. Like we have different interests that even overlap. But there are certain things about his personality that I don't think would be a good fit for a certain activity. That's not to say I'm not chemically connected to him in other ways. I am very emotionally and passionately attached to this man, right? He's a good friend, even if we don't have the same activities we used to. Like you can bond just over communication in the same as women, I think.
Right, but that's another thing is like, so if you and your friend don't talk for like years at a time, you guys are still friends. If a girl and her friend don't talk for just like 3 or 4 months at a time, they start to think they don't like one another and they just stop being friends. The ways that we create bonds and the ways that we think about bonds, what it is that makes us feel connected to one another, they're just different.
They are different. I would suggest they're quite socialized too. Like,
and that's the part that I'm just not sure about. And I feel like we have data to say that it's biologically driven in some ways.
It can be both.
Yes, I feel like it's definitely both, but I feel like nobody takes into consideration the biological part whatsoever. And they think, oh, well, we can just do this like women. And that's where my issue comes in. That's why I don't think we should compare us to women. Yeah.
Well, I think there are certain things you're describing about women that you reduce to biological that don't necessarily need to be reduced to biological. Like that women can bond over communication while men tend to bond over like physical activities. Like that might suggest some biological socialization, but I might suggest that's really social. I don't think that, like, I kind of want to say it's just obvious. Like men do bond over communication. Like you have people you just like talking to.
Yes, I'm not saying that we don't bond over communication. We do bond over communication. It's not intimacy that we bond over necessarily, though. It's not sharing.
What do you mean by intimacy?
I mean that when I was describing the way that women create that bond, the way that the rope gets stronger and stronger, it's communicating personal, intimate information about one another to where they understand the person better. So like we got one of the things that I did specifically is I got data sets on if we tell both men and women, I just got back from the game, I just got back from the Falcons game, we checked to see which answer was most given by men and which answer was most given by women. The answer most given by men, the response most given by men was who won. The response most given by women was, did they win? Did the Falcons win? Okay. So then we put this into a poll, and it was almost, I think it was 80% for each one gave the answers that we would expect them to give. Men still asked who won, and women still asked, did the Falcons win? Okay. So what women want to get from that is, what was your experience? Did you get excited when your team won? Were you happy when your team won? Like, is that like, what was your experience going to this game like? Were you happy? And that's what they want to get from this. They want to understand your emotional state and how you felt about this. Whereas men want the data, they want the information. And so they're asking who won. They just want to know who won, who lost. They might have an emotional response
to
it.
Process the information differently, but it's both informational.
Yes, well, yes, they're both informational, but the goal of the information is different. So men can still have an emotional response to it. They'll still be like, oh, hell yeah, my team won, dope, and they'll still get excited about it. But when they're asking the questions, what they're trying to get out of it is different from what the woman is attempting to get out of it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that's broadly true, but
and these are only small differences. They're not huge.
Yeah. How would you suggest we fix the communication deficit with men? Like,
again, I think just like making it less stigmatized to be emotional, to be able to cry, or to be able to communicate your emotions if you want to. I think just getting rid of the stigma is really all we need to do.
I would getting rid of this. Yeah, we do need to get rid of that. There's a societal problem with that, because we can't just get rid of that with other men. At some point, we got to communicate with women too, right? And that means women have to be more receptive to men talking about their problems which might well include women.
Well, currently, so the conversation that Destiny and I were talking about is men's relationships. Currently, men are much more open with women. They're much more likely to communicate their emotions, communicate personal things about themselves. We were talking about the ways that he was saying men's relationships are worse than women's relationships. And that's where I was disagreeing with him, is that they're not worse, they're different. We have different wants and needs that we want to get out of these bonds.
Yeah, but I would argue that some elements of those wants and needs embody toxicity and aggression that is unhealthy. So I'll give you an example. Men who bond over gaming, but have heated gamer moments with each other. Yeah. You know, I don't know how many people's moms I've fucked, and a lot of them have fucked my mom. I mean, like, you say shit like that, it gets like, kill yourself, right? Like, the way men might bond over things can be pretty fucking toxic, generally speaking.
Well, so but that's another thing that actually, you call it toxic, but this is actually something that men feel bonded over, is if they're able to take each other's insecurities and make fun of them for it. So like, you're short, you're ugly, you're stupid, like, and we feel closer to one another. It's like when people say like, it's okay if I make fun of you, it means I like you. Like, that's a real thing with men. Men are more likely to make fun of people that they like and that they enjoy being around.
Yeah. I kind of think that there's something abusive about that emotional bondage relationship that you're describing for men. I think it's probably good armor, good ways to learn how to deal with this kind of stuff in the real world. Like, if it's coming from a friend.
That one was you, wasn't it?
Huh? That phone was me. I'm sorry.
No, it's just fine. Like 2 seconds ago, my Facebook notification went off on my phone, and I was like, "Ah, crap! Everybody can hear that." And now, right after yours did it, so I was making sure that wasn't like mine echoing later or something. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I bond with a friend. We bond over mutual racism or toxicity or different kinds of aggressions, or even like sarcasm. And even in relationships where we'll make fun of each other, you know, you're fat, you're black, something like that. You're gay. I'm good friends with Justin. I give it to him all the time about how he's gay. It's funny as fuck. At least I think it is. Jingle Science Lab. But this, in the real world, we also use these insults with friends as offensive weapons, and that's another part of our culture that men's culture that is kind of accepted. Men's gamer culture in particular, and that's the part that needs to be fixed. It's okay to share an emotional bond over like a mutual racist joke with a friend, but that underlies that is something more vicious that men either don't want to address, such as the issues of racism, or just uncomfortable with personally, like certain like fat phobia issues. Like,
well, I don't know. Like, okay, so I feel like you, me, Destiny, like, we'll all, like, if we have, like, black friends, they'll make fun of us for being white, we'll make fun of them for being black, and we all get, like, stronger bonds.
And we get closer to each other, man. Yeah. Yes.
So when you categorize it as toxic, I don't know that it's necessarily toxic. I think that these are things that we bond over.
That on its own might not be toxic, but there are extensions of that. Like, there's extensions of racist or toxic behavior. Yeah, and especially amongst like conservative male culture, like there's a kind of hatred, a pleasure and a shared hatred of others in that particular culture. So I'll give you an example, like two people who who bond over the issue of like hating Muslims. I think this is something you're probably going to see more prevalently in this kind of culture, and it's a uniquely male culture, and it's uniquely male tolerated, I think.
Yeah, I'll agree with like the normalization part, for sure. Yeah. This is kind of like the entire like N-word panel where
Sorry, that's my phone again.
Yeah, it's fine. It literally, don't worry about it. I don't care. It's fine. But it's like if you remember the N-word panel on the Big Brain podcast where Destiny's saying, hey, I say the N-word in private. I make edgy jokes in private. You shouldn't be allowed to police my language. And black guys coming on saying, you're normalizing this sort of behavior to where people feel more comfortable being racist around one another. And this is bad for how we start to think about black people afterwards. So like, you are correct. Like, yes, there can be negative outcomes that come from these things when we normalize this sort of behavior. But at the same time, like when you and I are talking about this, we're more so talking about how men bond and how we create, stronger connections with one another. And so, yeah, there can be some like aspects of it that we take out where we acknowledge we just bond differently. We just communicate differently. We process information differently. We feel things differently. And that's more so what I was trying to get across, that I felt like every time I would say stuff like this, he would take it to some extreme of like, oh, well, yeah, they're not some, unemotional Giga Chad leader who, is just stoic all the time and never have emotions and they're always logical.
Was he seriously arguing that stoicism isn't like a uniquely male thing? Like there isn't a huge prevalence of stoicism amongst men?
Again, he's taking it to an extreme. So I'm saying, yes, we are more likely to be stoic. Whereas he's saying, oh, we have to be stoic and we don't have emotions and we couldn't possibly feel anything. He's taking it to like the most extreme thing that I keep having to like repeat over and over. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm not those guys. I'm not that person. So you don't have to keep repeating that, but that's where he would take it every time. So yeah. I think both of us were like stretching to try to get an argument out of it. So, yeah.
How are you feeling, Tom?
I'm feeling good. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good, but I've got some problems in my life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I don't want to listen. So.
Okay, so. Good job.
Yep. I'm gonna pull in the next guy.
Okay.
Is there anything else? Any other memes?
I mean, you just reversed everything you just said, like your entire position. Like
I'm just joking. It's a joke.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Love you, buddy. Bye.
Hey Tom, what's up?
What's up, man?
Yeah, so I more so just came for like some clarification.
Okay.
I feel like I have not done any research on the subject, so I'm probably going to say some stupid things. But I feel like the idea, the notion that you hold, I understand where it comes from. Like, I don't think, like, when Destiny was saying, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but like, it was something along the lines of, like, we are biologically hardwired to communicate a certain way. I don't think that, and I don't really think, maybe I don't know, I don't think you really said that, but if you did say that, I don't even think that's like the idea. To me, the idea is like there are certain like biological functions or reactions within our body
real
to
quick,
where I'll go ahead.
So the issue that him and I both had with this is that communication in and of itself is socially constructed. Like words, like what we're capable of saying, the ways that we like are limited on what we can or can't say, like what words are normal to say with other words and what that communicates with those words. Like the way that we communicate is already so socially constructed that any sort of biological imperative that would make us communicate differently is already hindered by the process in which we communicate in the first place. And so that's kind of where him and I had this gap where like we couldn't come closer together on like how much of it is biologically impaired or a biological imperative and how much of it is just the social construct. And then on top of that, like social norms and everything. But in what you just said, we had like a difference in there on how much like even language is going to hinder our communications.
Yeah, it was more so the degree of, which comes first. Is it nature or is it nurture? It's like that kind of argument. But I was just like trying to clarify something. So it sounds like I think there are probably certain like biological reactions, functions, like chemical things at play in the body for both males and females that don't like dictate necessarily the behavior, but it will probably like certain behaviors and proclivities probably fit better with your biology. And I
Hmm.
think it's easy to fall into that. So that's why there's like these behavioral patterns that develop. Where it gets so complicated is because socialization also has a huge impact on us. And I think that has more to do with, I think that kind of has to do with like neuroplasticity, but that's like a whole nother subject. But yeah, that's what I think. I think that there are probably, again, no research, but I do feel like there are probably certain biological functions and
Hmm.
reactions that occur in our body that don't necessarily, I wouldn't say hardwire us to communicate a certain way, but they can influence the proclivities we have, and maybe it feels more comfortable, like for us to do certain things or communicate a certain way. Like that's what I think the idea is. Now, whether or
Well,
not
that's real
it's
quick.
more so social, oh, go ahead.
That's why I keep saying words like we're more likely to do this, or we're more, we're driven to do this, instead of saying we're like we are 100% biologically like, we have to do it this way every time. Like, I'm just saying we're more likely, we have an imperative that says like this is more common or more likely with this group of people. That's why I'm like very careful in the way that I kept saying things, where he would take it to an extreme, but I was making sure the way that I worded it over and over was not an extreme at all. So
No, no, no. I think we definitely agree. I didn't even think that at
yeah,
all. I was
I
just
I
fine.
I
In my
I'm
opinion, I felt like Destiny was trying to steel man your argument, but he kind of was a little bit off because he's so used to talking to like all those red pill people.
yeah.
So it's probably like triggering in his mind to like, no, we're not doing that. Like I felt like that's what the energy was. But yeah, more so it's like I just don't for me, it's like I feel like we probably disagree on how much the biology influences these behaviors. Because to me, it's like I feel like that's super gray. Because
I
again,
don't even want to
like
make a statement to how much. I don't even think that I
yeah,
have a belief on how much it is. My
oh
issue is that there is some sort of biological aspect that changes how we communicate, and that if all we do is just make all else equal and we stop stigmatizing men being emotional, then we will get to that point. We will get to the place naturally. We will end up just communicating our emotions if we're encouraged to do this, if it said men can cry, men can be emotional, men can communicate these things, which we are doing already, then we
yeah.
will just naturally get to the point that we should be at. And that's kind of my point. My issue is he's saying we should be more like women. And I'm saying, no, we shouldn't be more like women. That's a totally different, like, you're on a totally different planet when you start saying stuff like that. It's just, we shouldn't stigmatize men being emotional and
I think the
allow them to be
reason
as emotional as they want.
I think something to point out is I think the reason why he's probably hinging on that argument is because I feel like he's assessing like the current realities we face, far as like how men disproportionately go through with suicide compared to women, and like the different type of male issues that we face throughout life and society. I feel like he's assessing that, and then he's like, because this is such a gray area, right? Whenever you're looking at that issue, you're like, okay, well, we need some kind of solution. And we know socialization has a huge impact on like everybody. So why not focus on what we can do? Socialization, which is again socially constructed, so we can change things. Why
Hmm.
not focus on that so we can mitigate these outcomes, these bad outcomes? And I think that's why he's probably hinging on that argument because probably could lead to like positive outcomes and like mitigate a lot of those typically male issues. And I think that's why he's probably going with that argument because he's assessing it that way. But then he's like kind of deviating away from the nuance that maybe there's like maybe there's like another side to this where there might be some like objective basis for why we even got here, combined with the socialization factor. Like, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, well, and it's not even simple enough to just say men, because men
no,
are going to be on some sort of like spectrum as well. I'm just clarifying for the audience and everybody. Like, even men are going to be on some sort of spectrum. So if we're saying like, you know, men are somewhere from like, you know, what is it, like 5 to 8 on like, you know, where they would range, and then women are somewhere from like, you know, 7 to 10. And like, that's kind of like the differences that I'm talking about. It is a small difference, but once we start looking at the range that men can exist within and the range that women can exist within, I'm saying like, accept the range, but also make them like feel comfortable as or feel as comfortable as they want, where they want. And that's why I kept bringing up, like, do you not think we're already making it like very acceptable for men? Like, have we not already made these changes? And he's like, yeah, of course we have. No, okay, well then where's the difference? What difference are you looking for? What is the change that you want? Because men are only becoming more and more lonely. Men are only having these issues more and more, while we're giving them more and more ability to be emotional and talk about their emotions. So we're like, even when we're talking about suicide rates, they're going in the opposite direction as well. So both ways, like, no matter how you look at this, that it's heading in the opposite direction for both people, or for both data sets. He did bring up that we would expect that from younger people, and I think that that's actually a good point. And I think I need to look into that, is to see like if it's younger people who are, if younger people's suicide rates are going up. Because last night we looked at suicide rates and we just saw that men suicide rates are going up, and older men's suicide rates are going up. And it was good that he agreed with what I said about like society changing, social norms changing, like, you know, demographics changing, like all of that changing probably has a bigger, probably has more to do with suicide rates than anything else. But yeah, I would want to know, like, if this is your prescription, if this is how you're connecting these two things, you should already be seeing the differences that you want to see. And I want to know where are the differences? Where do you see them?
Yeah, it's kind of weird though, because like personally, I've talked to like several different men that have literally outright said like they have stuff that they're going through, and like, you can't talk about this stuff, and they're like really stressed out, and we like talk about it and they feel better. So it's like I don't know, it's a really gray area, and it's very complicated, but it's also very fascinating. Again, I think like the socialization aspect, I feel like that could partially be tied into something to do with neuroplasticity. Not entirely, but I think partially. But that's like a whole different subject. But that was really all I wanted to say. I just want a clarification on the notion. That was it.
Cool. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Great show. Bye.
Appreciate it. Later.
Get any sort of actual thinking that like
Taking things to an extreme, getting turned.
fucking retards. Hold on.
When you say that like men have an inability.
Sorry, wait, hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Sorry, you fucking retards. Hold on. Chris Kyle didn't kill himself and his friend. Sorry, his friend killed him because he took his friend to go and process his PTSD by shooting the range.
Unrelated.
It's the exact same message on the story. My bad. It's the exact same message. Nothing changes on that fucking story. It's the exact same fucking thing. Okay? He had a friend who had PTSD and he took him to the range to shoot. He's like, oh, that helped.
Yeah, totally unrelated. Okay. He got the details wrong about the shooting range. Okay. I probably should have looked at the chat.